All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. Liar's Poker is a bar game started in the U.S. using the serial number on dollar bills as a medium for bluffing and, to a degree, reasoning. Players each hold one bill, shielded from the other players, just as you would with a hand of cards. Each player then makes a guess or a bid on how many of a particular digit is present among the whole set of bills. The next player then has to make a higher bid or guess than the last, a higher number of the same digit or the same number of the next digit up, and so on until the bid is challenged by all of the other players.
12 fives. Call me a liar. We're up the bid.
Then all of the players must show their hand. If the total number of the named digit matches the challenged bid, the bidder wins. If not, the bidder loses. I've seen different groups use different rules for the total matching the bid, but commonly there must be at least as many of the named digit as the bidder predicted. Most of the time I've seen the game played, if the bidder wins, he gets everyone's dollars. If not, they go in the pot and the game continues until someone wins it. I've seen other betting rules online, but this is enough description to get the point. Feminists have created their own liar's game, though one that is much more dangerous with much higher stakes. And the bidder isn't the only one taking that risk. They've even worked overtime to hedge their bets, stacking the rules in favor of accusers, just in case one's bluff is called. The one thing they haven't been able to eliminate is the weight of physical evidence against that bluff. Each time a woman lobs an accusation of sexual misconduct against a man, she is betting that he will not have some means of countering it. No witnesses, no retained communications from her proving her story false, no alibi should she claim an encounter occurred when it did not. Each is betting that she won't face scrutiny too thorough for her to bluff her way through. None expect themselves to be the liar whose case leads to a newsworthy or even precedent-setting lawsuit against her university. Most don't even expect their bluff to be called at all. But that's not the really big bid. The more significant numbers game. That game is in feminist hands. They're the ones betting on the prevalence and scope of sexual misconduct allegations resulting in, quote, responsible findings on college campuses. This speculation is the reason why they've spent so long stacking the deck. The goal is not to protect women from sexual predators or even just to create an increase in female power. It's yet another quest for a set of statistics that can be presented as evidence of an epidemic of rape on university campuses, necessitating, of course, an ever-increasing industry consisting of advisors, consultants, and paid professionals on every campus, whose jobs will consist of various responses to that supposed epidemic. A 1993 Toledo Blade article titled "Rape, the Making of an Epidemic" detailed earlier efforts in that quest. During the late 80s, feminists all over the U.S. were attempting to come up with a survey method to obtain statistics on sexual violence prevalence that could be used to determine the rate of occurrence on university campuses. The article examined that scene and found an interesting spectrum of attitudes. Some, like Dr. Margaret Gordon of Northwestern University, were attempting to obtain accurate results. Others, like Ms. Magazine founder and feminist icon Gloria Steinem, were looking for statistics that showed a high rate of rape, either regardless of accuracy or under the assumption that statistics that did not show a high rate must be inaccurate. Of the research environment at the time, Dr. Gordon said she felt pressure to have rape be as prevalent as possible, and that the really avid feminists were trying to get her to say that things were worse than they really are. In 1987, Steinem published a report by Mary P. Koss, whose research method involved a survey of only female students, one that didn't use the legal definition of rape, didn't ask respondents directly about having been victimized, and didn't allow for her conclusions to be impacted by respondents' interpretation or assessment of their own experiences. Instead, respondents were asked questions that were more vague and did not overtly mention victimization. Koss then interpreted their responses based on her own standards. Her conclusions were at odds with the majority of her respondents, with 73% disagreeing with her assessment of their experiences, and 42% having gone on to have sex again with their alleged rapists. Establishment feminists ignored the range of differing results among various researchers, choosing instead to bet on hysteria to push their agenda through Congress. Koss's statistics were cited on the Senate floor in 1993 in support of the Violence Against Women Act, which passed and took effect in 1994. Though her methods have received widespread criticism, including citation of serious issues with her survey questions, flaws in her definitions, and faulty logic in her conclusions, Mary P. Koss's methodology has been widely adopted by establishment feminist sexual violence prevalence researchers and even government agencies. The Centers for Disease Control uses it for its national intimate partner and sexual violence surveys, including Koss's later update of her original rape definition, which excludes the method by which a female perpetrator is most likely to offend against a male victim, forcing him to penetrate. United Nations researchers use Koss's methods in similar surveys all over the world. Law and policy in several countries has been based on recommendations by, quote, experts, end quote, citing statistics garnered from such surveys. And of course, these recommendations involve the establishment of government-funded advocates and organizations to assist the multitude of female victims which must exist according to this feminist-designed, feminist-led, feminist-proclaimed research. Now they are trying to change both public attitude and legal standards regarding what constitutes predatory sexual aggression, trying to make complaint numbers fit the assumption that there must be so many victims. The stack this entire industry sits on, however, is nothing more than a house of cards, feminism's rape culture narrative, upon which they have wagered that at no point will the ridiculousness of the false allegation culture they've created lead the public to call them on their bluff. They bet wrong on several levels, from the alarm sounded by the falsely accused themselves, even in the beginning, to the courts and the current administration taking a wrecking ball to federal education department policy that was based on that bet. Now they are watching their narrative waver and shake, as case after case in which their speculation didn't pan out ends up in the civil court system as well as the court of public opinion. The victim narrative is in a precarious position, and it looks like feminists are about to bring the entire house down on themselves. That is highlighted by Laura Dunn's keynote speech at Rowan University's Title IX conference, much of which was a lament of the loss of power that occurred when Betsy DeVos overturned the previous administration's Title IX guidance. Those who depend on feminism's rape culture narrative for their living are trapped. They cannot go back to the bets they placed prior to the 2011 Dear Colleague guidance. They cannot backtrack on their claims or their insistence that the kangaroo court system they created was necessary and fair. They cannot help but continue adding cards to their towering, unstable house, even as it teeters on the edge of collapse. They don't know any other way to play the game. The only question is, how high will the bet be when the bluff is called that finally brings the whole thing down? Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 53, Title IX and the Me Too Liars Game. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with another asthma attack on the air. Sorry guys. And I'm going to sound awful tonight, but I'm okay. So we're going to keep going. And I'm here with Prim Reaper, the adorable specter of death, who isn't taking me tonight. I'm staying, damn it. And our undercover reporter, Andrew, who has infiltrated academia, cleverly disguises himself And this is our last segment, I believe. We've only got like 10 minutes left. Hopefully we can get through 10 minutes on this.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. On professional victim Laura Dunn's keynote speech at Rowan University's recent Title IX Research and Resources Conference. But before we torture you guys with all of that, you gotta listen to a shill. If you're on YouTube and it starts experiencing platform malfunction syndrome and won't let you listen, we're also on Twitch and Facebook because you can't keep a good badger down, even when we're experiencing that syndrome. If you want to be sure, you'll always be able to catch our live streams, even if YouTube decides to throw us in the gulag for wrongthink, and one of our channels just got out and was put right back in there on very flimsy pretenses. Or if you want to catch our live show, our show in its audio format, remember to go to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications. And if you really want to thwart Google's efforts to get rid of our line of thinking, don't forget to like and share this and other Honey Badger live streams. Make sure everybody sees it. Tweet it to trending hashtags, whether they're relevant or not. Spam the internet with badgers. And with that out of the way, we're going to continue the torture. Let me bypass the end of our existing video. You're going to hear a blip here because I have to start the next thing. Come on, start. Or it could be that SciTube is just gonna die on me and not actually, like...
Try refreshing it.
No, if I refresh it, it's gonna mess everything up. Let me see if I can switch it. Wow, that's really messed up. Like, it just has to go through the end of the video to get to the next one. That's hilarious. Yes. Well, so SciTube has
easier for you.
The SciTubes has PMS. It's obsessive compulsive. That's what it is, not PMS. So we get to while we're waiting for the SciTube to be reasonable.
To stop being SciTube.
To stop being female. It's obviously female. It's going to do things its way and stop badger splaining to it. We will read off a couple of super chats here. We have Southern Celtic Water, who gave us US $5 and said, y'all were talking about the male rape in 13 Reasons Why. Did you know that it sparked a controversy? And we saw this before the show, and I'm going, what was that? What? I don't remember that. And then we remembered it was brought up during the speech last week. And I'm not actually familiar with 13 Reasons Why. But Prim, what was it you said about it?
Well, there was a super chat given to us about it, and it was basically just don't watch 13 Reasons Why. Just trust me on this.
And I know, like, as hard as it is, if it's not a productive documentary about suicide, and the topic is suicide, it's just going to be depressing. If it's not productive, it's not something that gives information that can be used to help prevent or mitigate the problem, then there's no reason to torture yourself with it. But no, I did not know that it created a controversy, and it might be something. If you could elaborate on that, that would definitely be interesting. An interesting point to discuss in the show. Master Rogue gave us US $5 and said, epic announcer guy voice 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 normal voice Prim. Hug a heart, smiley face. So those are our super chats so far, and now we gotta listen to the professional victim.
Leave campuses behind because they have all the power and privilege in the world. They need to focus on this issue. And of course, we want to talk about some legal efforts. Campus climate surveys matter.
Oh God.
Part of the opposition that comes up, a lot of people really have to believe this isn't a problem to then be able to stand against all the solutions that are being proposed. And there are those out there, I like to call them rape denialists, but some of them have published books and get to sit next to me on NPR and say, well, rape doesn't really happen all that often. One is too many, number one.
Okay, first of all, rape doesn't really happen all that often. That's one of the points we made in the open video.
You know, like when they say, "Oh yeah, you know, campus surveys matter," it's like, okay, but if you're saying that, you know, somebody, like, I don't know, groping your chest, which is still a bad thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, but if you're saying, is that equally as bad as some of the other things that could happen, like, you know, actual rape? It's like there is a scale of gray here. And even then they're saying, wasn't there a thing that was like, you know, did you drink too many drinks and did something that you didn't want to on that? Yeah,
it wasn't just vague. It was dodgy. If you want to know if somebody had a crime committed against them, you know, where they were forced into something against their will, you would think that you would use the phrase "against your will" in the questions about the crime. Her questions were things like, did you have sex with a man, or did you ever have sex when you didn't want to because a man gave you alcohol? And,
yeah, right. That's the way it was.
Yeah, so among other things, man A gives you alcohol. You get drunk. Yes. You make a bad decision and you have sex with man or woman B. Did man A rape you? Did the sex partner rape you? Were you taken advantage of while drunk? Were you coerced? Were you forced? But that gets counted under Koss's method of questioning. That gets counted the same as if somebody spiked somebody's non-alcoholic drink with a flavorless or low flavor, hard to detect alcohol, and gave them enough that they passed out or were incapacitated, didn't know where they were, blind, stumbling drunk, and then used that to their advantage. That's not the same thing as somebody voluntarily drinking, making a bad decision when they were not that drunk. And then coming back and saying, I didn't consent because I was drunk and my consent didn't count.
Well, it's like because a man gave you alcohol. It's like, okay, did he offer you a glass of wine, or did he tie you down, put a funnel in your mouth, and force you to consume alcohol? Like,
that is called a beer bong.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
that is not usually forced on anybody,
right?
But
it's just such an absurd wording, and it's like, take some responsibility, ladies. Like, it's not that hard.
And it's usually guys drinking that way too. It's not usually women. And there's usually a bunch of other guys standing around going, chug, 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 and none of them are responsible when the guy dies of alcohol poisoning. You know, that's actually a serious problem with alcohol. Getting drunk and having sex that you would have been smart enough to say no to and not initiate, because quite frequently women initiate when they're drunk, sometimes outside of their normal sexuality. You know, that's a problem, but it doesn't compare. And it's not somebody else's fault when you do it. Southern Celtic Water gave us another $5 and said the controversy was concerning the fact that male by another man rape was depicted. People said it should not have been included. Oh, I see, because, you know, it probably there were people that were upset that it acknowledged the fact that rape takes place in gay communities as well. It's the least prevalent among gay men. It is more prevalent, actually, according to the NISVS, which used the cost methodology, so the numbers are going to be exaggerated all around. But the people most likely to be victimized were actually bisexual. And it's probably because there's an attitude that people in the LGBT community take toward you. If you are bisexual, they assume that you are easy and just want to sleep around with everything that moves. And then there's also the fact that you have more potential dating partners means you have more potential dates, and you have more potential for ending up alone with somebody who doesn't respect your boundaries, and because you're dealing with both sexes. So, interestingly enough, it hits bisexual women harder than bisexual men. And then that, and combined with the fact that lesbians have more domestic violence also, and that both sexual and domestic violence are less among gay men than everyone else, tells me that the increase is probably more lesbian rape. Then it's basically that boundary issue I talked about last week with women, where they don't respect other people's boundaries, and they don't understand enforcing their own boundaries. When you get the combination of that lack of respect for other people's boundaries with somebody who doesn't know how to deal with their own boundaries, you're going to increase the incidence of sexual violence. But moving back to what our professional victim was talking about, the overall prevalence of rape is greatly exaggerated by the types of surveys that feminists use to garner statistics on which the rape culture argument is made. Koss's methodology, as I said, something like 73% of her alleged victims did not consider themselves victims. And with her questions not using the phrase "against your will" when asking the respondent about her experiences, that makes it much more difficult for people to narrow down, what should I answer to this question? Did you ever have sex when you didn't want to because a man gave you alcohol? Is very different than, did someone ever have sex with you against your will that you didn't prevent because a man gave you alcohol? And against your will says,
Phrasing.
I was not a participant. I did not engage in the behavior. I did not get a chance to say no, and so on.
It's honestly gross that they have to kind of, expand the numbers like that by using those kinds of weasel phrasings.
Yeah, the question becomes, did you ever get counted as a rape statistic when you didn't want to? Because a feminist didn't like your interpretation of your own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Boy.
Oh. Did you have something to add?
No. I was just scrolling through something, and
this picture.
Oh my gosh, yes, the tweet. Brock Turners grow up to be Brett Kavanaughs who make the rules for Brock Turners. Oh, that's just great.
Delightful.
Yeah. I was just somebody messaged me and then pointed me to that. I was like, oh my.
What a stupid comparison. Because Brock Turner got convicted and put in jail, and Brett Kavanaugh. There's no evidence that the accusation against him is even about an event that actually took place, much less the accusation actually being true.
Yeah. We'll get to that later.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go on with the torture.
Number 2, depends how you want to play with the numbers. Yeah, if you only want to focus on rape and no other form of sexual violence, the numbers are smaller. Sure, if you want to focus on 1 year rather than the course of someone's student education, 4 to 5 years, yeah, the numbers get smaller. But why are we playing with this issue? If you've met a survivor and you've seen the pain in their eyes, it doesn't matter. What matters is how we can help.
No, what matters is the truth. What matters is that we are actually responding in a fair, just, and even-handed, level-headed manner.
Well, if we're lying about a problem that doesn't exist, then, you're not helping anything.
She's just full of number 2 tonight, isn't she?
Yikes.
this is nuts. And we keep using the word survivor. I'm of two minds on the term survivor. I hate the word victim. I hate being called a victim. Especially, like, there were really awful things that happened to me when I was younger, okay? I was under 20 for all of them, at least the ones I'm referencing. And I'm 46. I'm not a victim today. It's not happening today. I'm not traumatized by it at the moment. I'm not crippled by it. I'm not, I'm not in a psychological version of a wheelchair from it. I hate the word victim. A victim sounds like, somebody who has not recovered. And the phrase recovered victim is more accurate, but it's clunky. So I understand the use of the term survivor. It sounds more positive. It sounds like, hey, I got through this and I am moving on with my life. Yay me. Screw the person who did it.
Right.
They don't have the power. It's like that moment in Labyrinth, you have no power over me, right? So I like that, but feminists have taken over the word survivor and made it sound like every single incidence of sexual misconduct is a near-death experience, and it's not that way. Now there were two examples, one of which happened over and over again over the course of about a year to me, that were very traumatic, very violent, and one of them was a near-death experience. The other one was as scary, if not scarier, than a near-death experience, because the person was insane. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever looked into the eyes of genuine crazy, but it's actually scarier than having someone point a gun at you, because you know what someone means when they point a gun at you. You don't know what someone means when you're looking into the eyes of genuine crazy. But to say that someone is a survivor and mean it the way feminists talk about it, when somebody groped them, or when they were taken advantage of in a manner that particular aspect of trauma isn't a part of, is empty and hollow, and it kind of belittles everybody who has been through a genuine near-death experience. And I don't like that. And so I understand why people get hateful over the use of the word survivor, because feminists have ruined it. But I don't have a better term that isn't clunky. So until I come up with one, or somebody else offers me one, I'm gonna continue to use survivor, because it's not as plaintive of a term to me, not as pitiful of a term as victim. I hate being called a victim. I'm not. And I understand a lot of people who have been through criminal assaults of various kinds, there are many types of criminal assault that can be just as traumatic as being raped. And I know that a lot of rape victims don't like hearing that, but it's true. Having everything you own taken from you is traumatic as hell. Having somebody take anything that you value is traumatic as hell. Having someone try to kill you is traumatic as hell.
I suspect that these guys would balk if we called somebody a false rape accuser survivor.
Yeah,
but that's equally as traumatic in some cases, I'm quite sure.
Yeah, being dragged out of your house in cuffs and thrown in a cell with, to quote Arlo Guthrie, mother rapers, father stabbers, father rapers. That's traumatic as hell. You don't know who you're in a holding cell with. And when you get thrown into the municipal holding cell for the city of Dayton, that's traumatic. I imagine it's got to be even worse for people who live in places like Chicago and LA, New York. And it happens in those cities too. So this idea of acting like the trauma experienced by rape victims is an excuse for ignoring the due process rights of the entire general public, it's bullshit. I wouldn't want somebody to use me to argue that point, and I'm offended that feminists do. It's not going to stop them, though. And I actually said something on Twitter about that. It's not the Pussy Hats. What do they call themselves? It's from the stupid Margaret Atwood novel that's so popular now.
The Handmaid's Tale or whatever?
Yes, The Handmaid's Tale. There's some handmaids movement that's protesting Kavanaugh and actually tweeted out that they speak on behalf of all sexual assault survivors. And I pointed out that they don't. They don't speak out on behalf of all of us, and they don't even give a shit about male survivors. Boy, they blocked me in 2 seconds.
I bet.
Yeah, they don't represent what they say they represent. But let's go back to our other professional victim here.
And statistics, as far as I'm concerned, matter most to institutions to say how much of our resources do we need to dedicate to this issue. Are we getting better year to year? Are we getting worse? And we know reporting numbers going up is better, but you need to...
Oh, wait. So what she just said, reporting numbers going up is better. A crime, we are doing great on this crime if we are getting more people reporting that this crime happened to them.
Yeah, logic is a little too hard, remember?
Like, okay, more people are getting raped. Isn't that great, guys? There's your cherry-picked quote mine for the week. But seriously, she just said they're doing better if more college women are getting raped. Do I misunderstand this?
I don't even know what to say.
Okay, so everybody that really, really knows me, that's heard me talk about it, knows that my mother, I was 10 years old, my mother almost died from a car accident that was caused by a drunk driver. I was in the car. If I'd have been laying the other direction, because I was asleep in the back, right? I had my head behind the driver's seat and my feet on the other side. And if I'd have been laying the other direction, you wouldn't be listening to me because my head would have been crushed. So I don't promote drunk driving. I think it's a really stupid thing to do. I think if you're going to drink, you arrange to not have to drive. You know you're going to drink, you arrange to not have to drive. That's the smart thing, okay? But the way it's handled in the United States is stupid. And one of the things that really bugs me about the narrative on drunk driving is when I was growing up, the blood alcohol level at which you were guilty of driving while intoxicated was, see if I say this right, was 0.14. Okay. And drunk driving dropped over the years quite a bit. And it was a steady decline as anti-drunk driving campaigns informed drivers of what a dumb idea it is to get behind the wheel of a couple of tons of metal and glass while you're intoxicated. So people wised up and they didn't do it. So they weren't making as many drunk driving arrests. So they weren't meeting their drunk driving arrest goals. So they dropped the drunk driving level to 0.08. And all of a sudden, they're making a lot more drunk driving arrests because people knew how much they could consume before they were considered too drunk to drive. And so they weren't breaking the law until the law changed to a stricter level. Suddenly, all the people's drinking habits that did not put them at odds with the law, put them at odds with the law. And drunk driving arrests went up, and everybody celebrated. Yes, we're catching more drunk drivers. And of course, there was also this campaign when that happened, the years after it changed, the first few years after, there's an epidemic, a sudden epidemic of drunk driving. What changed about people's attitudes? Well, nothing. Nothing changed about people's attitudes. The law changed. And it became easier to get caught in the net of anti-drunk driving with less alcohol in your system. So feminists come along and they keep sliding the standard for what constitutes a sexual assault, what constitutes sexual violence, what constitutes rape, and they're continuing to remove responsibility from women for establishing, communicating, and attempting to enforce our boundaries. In fact, they've gotten to the point now where they are actively stating that women have zero responsibility for those things. Men are just supposed to know that the strictest of all women's boundaries apply to every woman, whether she wants it or not, unless they are told otherwise. And they have to ask for that information. And if they do ask for that information, and they are asking against the woman's will for that information, then they're also guilty of sexual violence. They're guilty of harassment. Right? They're guilty of being a sex pest. So either way, they're automatically responsible for the feelings of all the women around them. Now we're hearing more reports of sexual assault based on those ridiculous standards. It's not because more sexual assault victims are coming forward. It's because more women who haven't been sexually assaulted think that their experience constitutes a sexual assault they have to feel traumatized about because feminists have lied to them about their boundaries.
Yeah, and it's kind of ridiculous too because it really takes away a lot of a lot of the learning experience for young women who are experimenting with their sexuality and learning where their boundaries are and things like that, right? Like, when I had my first intimate experience with a guy, I wound up kind of wishing that I hadn't done that. I said to him, I'm not sure that I'm ready. And his response was, you'll be fine. And then I made the ultimate call to go ahead and do it anyway. And then afterwards, sure, I was upset with myself. I cried a little bit. But you know what? I learned where my boundaries were. I learned what I was and wasn't comfortable with. The last thing I would call myself from that is traumatized. To say that was a traumatizing event is like, why are you trying to put that not only on me, but why are you trying to put that on him? At worst, he was a 19-year-old guy who wanted to get some from his girlfriend. Like, that's not sexual assault. And I don't know why they insist on wanting to make it this way, because they're not only putting these horrible accusations on these guys, but they're also taking away power from women who would otherwise get a chance to learn where their boundaries are. It really drives me nuts. It's very disempowering if you think about it.
Yeah, it really is. And
they run off of victim points. So.
Yeah, they do. But it is disempowering, and honestly, the way that I parented, like my stepdaughters, I didn't have as much parental authority, obviously, because they have a mother, and I'm the backup, right? But I still was able to talk about this stuff, and that's one of the things. I mean, I've even said, stuff to my nieces about that. One of the things that I've tried to emphasize when I've had influence over a young woman was, you have every right in the world, every right, and the responsibility to decide what you personally are okay with, and to decide, what you personally are not okay with, what you personally want in life, what your goals are, and figure out what behavior is wise versus what behavior is foolish in terms of how to meet those goals. And you are responsible, and you have the right to speak up about those boundaries. Those are boundaries. You have the right to say something. You have the right to say no. You have the right to emphasize no. and you have the right to beat the crap out of somebody if they try to physically force themselves on you. And, you know, I think both of my stepdaughters could do it. They're both very strong. My older stepdaughter actually picked me up off the ground when she was 6.
Wow.
Yeah. So she's just like her dad. My husband, when our son was about 3 years old, we were at a festival and they had one of those cars you could beat up with a sledgehammer and everything, and he was working on it. He was upset about something, and so he paid $5 to get 5 minutes, and the guy gave him indefinite time. He just took one look at him. He's like, "You can have all the time you want."
Nice.
So I can understand you're going through something, right? In the middle of this, he bashes the door. The door sort of pops partway open, and he's trying to bash the window frame with it. The window frame is left, but the window's been busted out, and it won't do what he wants it to do. So he grabs it with his hand. Now this is a car made in the 80s, so it's a steel car, and he just bent it down like it was a wire coat hanger. And so I know where that strength comes from, right? But enough bragging about my husband. That can make me forget what I'm talking about entirely. But in any case, this idea of women growing up, little girls growing up, to not have that tool. It's a kind of abuse to teach women that they are not allowed to use that tool, that they are not allowed to speak up for themselves, that they are not allowed to defend themselves, that they're not allowed to say no, and that they're not even allowed to know ahead of time when no applies. You have every right to make that decision for yourself, and you are responsible for it, because it's you. It's your whole person. I don't know. I guess I get really passionate about this, partly because that's one of the things that gets damaged in a person when they are victimized by a pedophile. Pedophiles work very hard to blur your boundaries, to make sure you don't have boundaries, to make sure that they sort of own your sense of self and your sense of right and wrong, your sense of what's okay and not okay, and there's not allowed to be a line between the person they are and the person you are. And feminists do the same thing to women as a sex. Feminists as a group, not necessarily individually, but as a group, do that to women. And it's one of the things that pisses me off about feminism that isn't necessarily about men, and the things that feminists do to men as a sex. This is very crippling, and it's very predatory. And it's not just feminists not understanding something. It's reprehensible. And let's go on with our professional victim.
Have reports contrasted with victimization. What's the actual scope of the problem? How many people are finding our resources? So to me, the most important piece of legislation, whether it comes through CASA or something else, is getting campus climate surveys passed. I've already talked about this, but I definitely think now is a great time to have a constitutional amendment. We have the Women's March, we have Me Too, we have Time's Up. We're uniting around this issue. Let's just go ahead and finish what the suffragists started in 1932. 32 or
Oh, she's
about to talk about the ERA.
Suffragists. No, the suffragists were not feminists. The suffragettes were feminists. The suffragists was a genderless suffrage movement that was for universal suffrage, and they had been fighting for suffrage long before the suffragettes came along.
Yeah, because the suffragettes were terrorists, weren't they?
Yeah, well, the UK suffragettes were violent terrorists. The United States suffragettes and the Canadian suffragettes, if I remember right, they did not commit as many public violent acts, but they did other things like, and this is downright nasty. Suffragette women in the U.S. would refuse to pay their taxes and let their husbands go to jail, so that their husbands would vote for politicians that would be willing to give women the vote. It was like you hear about domestic abuse, psychological abuse today, when a husband doesn't give all of his income to his wife so she can spend it on whatever she wants. He's engaging in financial abuse, but his wife not paying her taxes, so he goes to jail because he hasn't promised to vote the way she wants. Not abuse,
yeah,
right?
that's pretty messed up.
Yeah.
Just a tad.
So that's the difference between the suffragists and the suffragettes.
But no, she's gonna start talking about the ERA.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Someone correct me on that. I think it's 1923, and passed this constitutional amendment. We've come so close, and again, it's a little bit in my talk, but it was within 3 states of passing in the 70s. And guess what happened in 2017? One of those states passed it. And then guess what happened the day after my talk? Another state started passing it. We're actually 1 state away from the Equal Rights Amendment right now as you sit here.
So, like I said, I think I've said this before on the Equal Rights Amendment. I would be all for an amendment that would state that the 14th Amendment applies to sex discrimination the same as it does to racial discrimination and so on. I would be all for that. I would be all for...
Yeah, then women would have to register for the draft.
Yeah, and I'd be all for an amendment that did nothing more than that. But I'm not for an amendment that says Congress can pass laws based on calling sex discrimination unconstitutional. Because that turns around and says if a baker in, what was it, California? No, Colorado. If a baker in Colorado does not want to write a specifically pro-gay message on his cake that he's making by hand for this person, making from scratch for this person, and decorating by hand, that he's not allowed to have his business. That is what the ERA will do. That is what that is all about. Congress should not be determining these things for the United States public.
Like, as much as I am fully supportive of, like gay marriage and things like that, find another baker, for fuck's sakes. Let this guy run his own business the way he wants to run it.
Or just buy a cake from him and put the message on yourself.
Right.
I think your rights end where another person's nose begins, and I don't think that anybody has the legal right to force anybody else to say anything that they consider to be wrong.
Well, and
that's what that was about, and that's what this is going to do.
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing with other things such as the right to health care, because you're forcing somebody to do something in order to satisfy your right, which...
Yeah, I'd go so far as to
say... Not a right at that point if you're forcing somebody at gunpoint to do something.
I don't think Catholic employers should be forced to pay for birth control pills, even through an insurance company. I don't think that any employer should be forced to pay for anything that they have a religious objection to. I think that should be something that's negotiated between the employee and the employer. And I think that if Congress had not, over the years, interfered in the economy so much that the job market got bad, we wouldn't have that problem. If the job market is great, employers have to make concessions in order to be able to persuade people to work for them. If the job market sucks, then employees have to make concessions in order to get employers to hire them. And so you basically, if you want employee rights, if you want workers' rights, you work hard to keep the conditions in place that keep the job market healthy. And that solves the problem. Somebody can't come to an agreement with one employer, they go to another employer. If an employer is going to have standards that limit the number of people that are going to be willing to work for their company, they'll have a harder time. And Yeah, they did. I'm gonna read French Honey Badger's super chat out of line because it's relevant here to what I'm talking about. They purposely sought. He gave us $5 and said they purposely sought out the baker to create precedent. Also, it should not be limited to religious objects. You don't have to justify anything. And that is correct. They did seek the baker out to create a precedent, and they went after him a second time. There's another case. I don't know what has happened out of it, but there was another case brought against him. And anything that people think an employee deserves, anything you want to promote for employees, for workers, again, the best way to make it possible for workers to obtain those conditions is to keep the job market healthy. Keep the job market so healthy that employers have to compete for workers instead of the other way around. And I mean, that's common sense. You are going to be able to negotiate a better deal if you are on higher ground, if you're on better footing than the person you're negotiating with. We have Southern Celtic Water had given us... Oh, wait, I already read that one, I think. Yeah. Then we had The Void That Bites gave us 379 rubles, but it says rub. We got 379 rubs. We usually get sex, but this time we got rubs. So, plot twist. Feminism is male supremacist movement because they believe men to be all-knowing and cognate demigods. And, if feminism is a religion, patriarchy theory makes men both God and the devil. French Honey Badger followed up with another $5 super chat that said, high unemployment and low earnings is the result of the state constantly supposedly helping the market clean up. And I agree once again, our federal government has interfered so much in the market and then turned around and blamed employers for the conditions that they created. It's sad. And then they come around and say, well, we're going to force you to buy this, and we're going to force you to give your employees that deal, and so on. No, fix the job market. Get out of it. That's the best way the government can fix the economy. Get their fingers out of it as much as they possibly can, and let people negotiate for themselves. But they're not going to do that. We're lucky that we've had the boost that we've got going on now. But let's get on with Miss Professional Victims ERA spiel.
Pick a state: Virginia, North Carolina, Arizona, bug 'em.
Confusion.
It's going to become the last state, because if we get 3/4 of the state to ratify it, no matter what time limit Congress put on it in the 70s to politically appease the conservative rights, 3/4 of the state is all you need according to the Constitution. So we are one state away. I think this is possible. I think it is where we need to be focused. And of course, I do care about fair process. A lot of people see me as a victims' rights attorney, which I am. I advocate for survivors. I have not defended the accused, but I have sat in these work groups. I have thought about due process, and it does matter. It's actually really awkward when you're representing a survivor and you're flagging a due process violation for the school because that attorney on the other side has not bothered to. And it really helps my clients too, because if there's a due process violation, there's going to be a lawsuit against the school. My client's not going to be able to intervene very easily. And at the end of the day, if that accused student wins, we get to do it again. A whole second time from square one. They don't get off forever because of a lawsuit. All it is a remand. It's a do-over. So my client gets to sit through it again, not because they have done anything wrong, but an institution has done something wrong. So
it's good that she's advocating for due process. I noticed that when she first said it, she said fair process. But of course her angle isn't so much that the lack of due process wrongs the falsely accused, because she's not going to be able to acknowledge falsely accused, right? It's got to be all about the accuser. But her point is very solid. Even though there shouldn't be a do-over, in terms of if there's a due process violation by the school. They shouldn't put everybody through another hearing. If the reason somebody was found responsible was because he didn't get a fair hearing, then he's not responsible. But it is unfair to accusers who are telling the truth when due process is not afforded to the accused. Because you make an accusation against somebody based on what happened to you, and you go through a kangaroo hearing where guilt is guaranteed in the end. People are going to look at that, and they're not going to accept that your part in it was legitimate. And so it's going to reflect badly on actual victims as well. That's the least important reason why due process is important. But it's still a reason.
A very vested due process, which is for state schools because it is related to constitutional rights that apply to the states, but fair proceedings for private schools, for those of you who are at those. I think we need uniform standards. I think we just need to have that conversation rather than doing it popcorn style. And of course, last but not least, I've mentioned it a few times, I'm no longer the executive director of Serve Justice. I will always be the founder. I will always be supportive. But I myself have moved on, and I've done it on purpose because I like to always think of what's next. I think the Equal Rights Amendment is coming, and I want to be the lawyer that argues that when it goes to the Supreme Court. I want to be the person that's helping find creative ways to enforce that. So for the time being, I am at a private firm, the Fearburg National Law Group. Again, we would be the group suing you if you did something wrong at your school. We do fraternity hazing, campus sexual assault, gun violence, a lot of those topics, but I'm going to be focused on involving Title IX standards. What does it mean? Substantial control, which hopefully all of you know, but I'll give a little precursor, this idea of when does a school have enough duty to address someone is an evolving standard right now. Everyone knows if it's faculty or staff, it falls under Title IX. What if it's the visitor? You know, a visiting professor? Probably. Visiting athlete? Probably. What if it's just a visitor? I don't know.
So how exactly is the school supposed to enforce that against somebody's cousin helps them carry their dorm furniture up to their room? They bring I don't know, a desk or something to put in their room. Their room doesn't already have a desk. And somebody's cousin comes in and helps to bring this, and a floor mate accuses the cousin. What are they going to drag this cousin back to the university for a hearing later on?
Just call the police, for fuck's sakes. It's not that hard. That's yeah. No, the university should not be responsible for people who are not part of the campus one way or another. The university should not be responsible for campus visitors. Can include like most campuses have a like a student union or a cafeteria that is like your high school cafeteria, except it's in a separate building, and you know the students don't all have to go there to eat if they don't want to. But that place is going to get, just like a high school cafeteria does, it's going to get ingredient deliveries. It's going to get deliveries of canned goods and stuff like that. The postman visits campus. You know, you have campus security, and then you also have police come on campus. You also have other things that get delivered on campus. And then you also have, most campuses have an art department and a music department, and they allow the local community to come and see presentations by students. So you could have somebody come on campus that isn't even associated or affiliated with anybody on campus. They're just from the local community coming to see a gallery show of local students' artwork, or the play that gets put on by students, or the musical performance that gets put on by the music students. And how is the university supposed to even begin to be responsible for something like that? That stuff should all be turned over to the police. That should all be police matters, not
not the university. How could she even think that?
You logic too hard. You need to stop.
Yeah, I'm gonna end up with an aneurysm. Jeez.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, let's interrupt her with a couple of super chats.
We got a lot.
Yeah, Mr. Roboto gave us US $2 and said idea, feminist bakeries, every dollar goes to sexism.
Well, they already kind of do that, where they're selling like cookies for $1 for men and 72 cents for women or whatever.
Oh my god.
Pretty
Yeah,
embarrassing.
it's really dumb. The 72-cent cookie should actually be 28% smaller.
Yeah.
And because that represents the difference in the actual equal work, but they should still be considered equal cookies. Because yeah, when feminists claim to be doing equal work, they're doing one way or another, whether it's hazard pay or hours worked or being willing to work on the weekends and at night, shift differentials, that kind of thing. They're doing 28% difference in how they work. Whether it's less quality, lower job performance, less flexibility, less willingness to do specific types of jobs, less risk, they're doing 28% difference to get that 72 cents on the dollar. So they get a 72% cookie. But in any case, they will never accept that. I've actually been blocked over and over again on Twitter for pointing out that it's not equal work. And I will continue to get blocked on Twitter for pointing out that it's not equal work until I eventually get banned for pointing out that it's not equal work. French Honey Badger gave us US $5 and said, the economic boost is fake. It relies on the government continuing to spend money. It's not real prosperity. And I can agree with that as well. Although I think the reduction in interference with the job market itself does make a difference. And the fact that we have employers that had moved to other countries, moved their production to other countries that are coming back now, says something. And that's at least better than what Obama was doing. We still need to get somebody in there that is like, we've had Democrats and we've had Republicans, and as down on the Democrats as I have been, the Republicans are still too interfering and authoritarian. And I'd love to get somebody in there that isn't from either party. I just wish that the libertarians were more libertarian.
Not retarded?
Yeah, we're actually libertarian.
And not Aleppo?
Yeah. So...
Well, unfortunately, the way that our electoral college works is probably not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues, actually. One of them is the fact that the mainstream press, they're not really mainstream, the establishment press, because they don't really go along with what the public would, agree with either. But the establishment media on both sides of the political fence will not, when they host debates and stuff, they will not include parties other than the Republicans and the Democrats, unless they get enough pressure. They won't. I think they ought to let all the political candidates talk. And everybody should be basically remembered during the election season on their merits. And we've had some candidates that are downright crazy, but they should still be allowed to talk so people can see how crazy they are. And if they happen to be, like a stopped clock and have a good idea once in a while, the idea should be expressed so that people can evaluate it on its merits. And, that's not happening. That's part of the problem. People don't hear from some of the candidates because the media decides that they're not important. So then when they vote, they go in with two parties in mind. So... And we have, let's see, Ram Bam 3000 gave us £5 and said, "Keep up the good work, Badgers." And then we have The Void That Bites, gave us another 40 rubs, 40 rubles, said men on campus are sexual assault. You know, there are women that are starting to treat it that way. It's crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Felicia Bryant gave us US $5 and said, "I don't believe Kavanaugh accuser waiting 36 years is garbage. When I was raped, I accused the man the next day. Now he is in jail, being someone's bitch."
Well, I mean, there you go. Like
the irony.
Accusing the next day,
Yeah.
that's the way to go, right?
Yeah.
That's the optimal.
Well, yeah.
When you still have, like, the clothes that you were wearing or stuff like that, or, like, physical evidence.
Yeah, that's the important thing.
Kind of helps your case a little bit.
That's the important thing. You want to be able to give, when you have been through a crime, any crime really, when you have been through the crime, you want to give the cops every tool you can possibly share with them to make it easier for them to get the person that committed the crime against you. Like, that's kind of the goal of filing a complaint, about. And that's one of the things that bothers me about the way feminists want campus sexual misconduct to be handled. They do not want accountability for anyone in the process. You're not being held accountable if you just get kicked out of school. If you committed a violent crime, if you commit a felony, and all that happens is you get kicked out of school, you're getting off easy. You know, and if you lie and claim that somebody committed a felony when they didn't, and all you get is, told, no, they're not getting kicked out of school, you're getting off easy. You know, either way, this is something that should be handled by cops. And false accusers should be prosecuted. You prove somebody filed a false police complaint, then that should be prosecuted. If you can prove that somebody lied to police during an investigation to imply that somebody was guilty of something that they were not guilty of, that should be prosecuted. If you can prove that somebody perjured themselves to try to get somebody falsely convicted of a crime, that should be prosecuted.
Let's get back to the
back to our professional victim.
Back to the cancer.
Versus Kansas State University. That's the argument being fought right now. The Title IX lawsuit I just settled, that was part of the conversation. We are expanding what the university may have to respond to. And so really keep an eye out, work with your general counsel's office or wherever the legal people are to see how Title IX grows at a time when the administrative enforcement is shrinking.
How Title IX grows.
It's something that shouldn't be growing.
Well,
but remember,
really...
more rape accusations are better.
No power and no privilege.
Yep, no power, no influence. Jesus Christ.
Oh, that too, yeah.
You know, this level of control shouldn't be growing.
Well, and that's the thing that I was going to say. Like, you can tell that these guys aren't really all that necessarily concerned, like, victims or with people who are, struggling with anything. It's all about growing their power. You can tell by the way they phrase things a lot of the time. It's even a lot of my textbooks. They don't care about making things more inclusive necessarily. They care about expanding feminist hold on various institutions.
Yeah, exactly. And of course the government's going to go along with that with Title IX, particularly the education department, unless, Betsy DeVos is more awake about this than even we think. Like, I know she's awake about at least the due process aspect, but Title IX is outdated. There isn't a push to get women off university campuses. There is a nationwide, multifaceted, multi-organizational, completely tolerated effort to make women dominant on university campuses. Like, 50-50 is not enough. Women have to be a majority for them to have equality, which is like completely double-speak, new-speak, but that's the push that exists. So Title IX is outdated. There is parity in education already. there is beyond parity. Women have a bigger chunk, and they have a bigger chunk of they're graduating more than men are graduating. You know, they're fine. There is no discrimination taking place there, and so yeah, we don't need Title IX anymore. They expanded into sports, and rather than ever really increasing women's participation in sports, they just started attacking men's participation in sports and actually decimated men's Olympic sports. And in the market of men's Olympic sports, from which our actual Olympic athletes are plucked. So that was great for the U.S., right? And now they've created this kangaroo court system that lets off both actual perpetrators and false accusers with a slap on the wrist, but punishes the falsely accused with a loss of their potential career choice. Which, like I said, if you actually did commit a violent felony, for that level of punishment is a slap on the wrist. For somebody who did nothing, that's a reprehensible punishment. But for having committed a violent felony, that's a slap on the wrist. You're not incarcerated. You can go live your life. You can go do something else. You can move away. You can leave the country. And you're not incarcerated. You're not prevented from doing it again. And this is the sense of Title IX. It needs to be repealed, and it doesn't even really need to be replaced.
And of course, I started this whole presentation focused on survivors. I want to end on the same note. Survivors are still coming. Survivors who are activists, who are outspoken. For those of you who don't know, this was a high school valedictorian. Her name's up in the corner of Louisville. She spoke as a valedictorian, was making a speech, wanted to bring up how sexual assault had not been handled when she reported it, and her mic was cut. So she was silenced in the most obvious of manners. So you can watch the clip on CNN, but you better believe she's getting ready for college. She's ready to go. She is...
Wait, so basically, because an activist wanted to use her graduation speech as
to be an activist?
as a platform for a political statement. And she got stopped from doing that. They're complaining. Time and place, come on. People are there to celebrate their kids' graduation. Everybody in the audience at a graduation, nobody in the audience at a graduation that isn't directly connected to the valedictorian. Nobody else really cares what the valedictorian has to say. Right? Nobody who isn't a parent of one of the valedictorian's friends, or who isn't the valedictorian's parent, or who isn't a friend of the valedictorian. Nobody cares what the valedictorian has to say. That is all pomp and circumstance.
Yep.
It's all fluff. And the valedictorian knows that too. People just get through that speech. The valedictorian gets through that speech. And yeah, everybody's proud that somebody from their community got straight A's and did a great job in school and was involved in a lot of community stuff and everything. But that's not an abuse of the individual, not allowing her to hijack parents' celebration of their own child's success for her political agenda.
Part of the next wave, and there are survivors and activists like her all over. If we have seen nothing, just Parkland activists, right? There is so much power in the next generation, and we need to lift them up and continue that activism going. So this is my wall of shame for the future. These are individuals that I personally am watching to figure out how they are going to keep pushing back against this movement. Stephen Miller is obviously part of the Trump administration. He's been outspoken and not believing survivors of this issue. Emily Yaffe, who's written
not believing
some pretty cutting
accusers.
articles, including
Yeah.
about me directly, really telling women not to drink, that it's their fault, and that these are experiences they need to get over as a way to
Okay,
protect
you know
men.
what? No, that's not what people are saying. People are saying that women have to be responsible for their actions the same as every other function.
Like
Okay.
if I was a drunk driver and killed somebody while I was drunk driving, I can't use the fact that I was drunk as an excuse for my actions.
You know,
Yeah,
it's even
seriously.
You know, feminists will come up with an excuse for the drunk driving one all the time, and their excuse is lame, but they don't have an excuse. They don't have an answer for this. If I am drunk, if I have, that third beer that puts me over the edge of between having common sense and not having common sense, and then somebody makes some stupid pro-feminist statement that pisses me off, and I clock them in the jaw, I have just consented. I have just consented to getting into a fight because I started it, right? If they hit me back, they are hitting back in self-defense. If they grab my hands and pin me to the wall so I can't hit them anymore, they are doing that in self-defense. If they consent to get into a fight by hitting me back, then we are both in a fight, and it is a consensual fight, right? If I go to the police later and say that person hit me, they're going to arrest me after I admit that I threw the first swing. But if I go up to some guy after a third beer and start flirting with him and go back to his place with him and bonk his brains out, and I go to the cops the next day and I say, I was too drunk, he took advantage of me, they'll arrest him. That's not right. When you take an action and you initiate something, you are consenting to it. Even if you have had a few.
I suspect that if a drunk woman went up and punched a guy and the guy punched her back, it would still wind up resulting in the guy being arrested.
Yeah, but if a drunk woman went up and punched a guy, 90% of guys, maybe more, even if she was bigger than they were, wouldn't defend themselves the way they would if another guy came up and hit them. Because they actually are genuinely protective of women. And my brother, at 9 years old, he already knew that he was socially considered to be responsible, and he had an attitude of being responsible for the safety of the girls around him. At that age, it was already instilled in him. And, part of it was he was reared up to be a gentleman. That's the way our family is, and that is the way our community is. I'm from a very conservative area. Not conservative as in left-wing, right-wing, but conservative as in old school versus, modern. And this was something that he knew so well that when we were mugged for our candy one Halloween night, he broke the nose of a 14-year-old for assaulting me. And, that's it's remarkable that he did that to begin with, but it's still, that is the way guys are. They're taught that from early on in their lives. And this idea that, women are in danger from every man around them is just bull. But guys know that responsibility for their own safety, for maintaining an awareness of their surroundings, for defending their person if they are attacked by another person, for defending even their friends and their family members, and for defending the girls around them. They are aware of that from early childhood. Girls grow up to be full-fledged adult women without having even an awareness of their own boundaries, their own responsibility to defend themselves, the girls aren't even responsible for being aware of their surroundings. I can't tell you how many times I've watched as I'm like driving through the parking lot of a grocery store looking for a parking space, as, you know, some family gets out of their car to go into the store, and the woman's walking along with her phone in her face, and the guy has to grab a hold of her shirt to keep her from walking out in front of my moving van. It's just insane. Girls grow up never realizing how important it is to even know what's around you, and much less take care of their own safety and their own protection, to not make themselves vulnerable to attack by people who are you know, criminally disinterested in respecting other people's boundaries. And it bugs the shit out of me that people hold men responsible for that lack of awareness. It's not hurting women. It's not misogynistic. It's not hateful, and it's not victim blaming to try to empower women with that awareness, and to try to remind women to empower themselves with that awareness. It's not saying that if somebody violates you, that it's your fault. It's saying that you deserve and you have the right to not have to risk being violated if there's something that you can do to prevent it.
And their rights and their kind of futures. And of course, in the corner, a Harvard professor who is critiquing trauma-informed care and saying that that is somehow disadvantaging and unfair, and some issues. So there's a lot of people out there.
How dare he critique an idea? Don't you know that critiquing ideas is misogynistic?
There who are actively working to undermine the progress we've had. But in looking at the future and trying to figure out how do we fight back, how do we make change, I always look to the past. You have to know where you've come from to figure out where you're going. And I had
No, you don't. That is probably one of the dumbest things we have all these stupid little cliches that people... That is one of the dumbest cliches that people ever used. I could find my way to Columbus, Ohio, without ever looking back at where I grew up. I could find my way from where I am now to Columbus, Ohio, on a map, and I don't need to look back at where I came from. You need to know where you are and what your goals are to find out where you're going. Jesus Christ.
She just says dumb shit.
This is like, I have this public speech I have to make, and it has to be 15 minutes long. It has to be an hour long, so I need to add some things to it. Let's put this cliche in this one spot.
Less than 6 minutes to go.
It's kind of hard to see her, admittedly, in that corner standing there with me. Her name's Jerry Cannon. She's the first Title IX plaintiff in our history. She went to the Supreme Court in 1979 with Cannon versus the University of Chicago. And her case was about sex discrimination. She wanted to go to med school as a woman. She was already a nurse. She had a great MCAT score. She was qualified. She couldn't go in because she was a woman. And her case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, you do have a right to sue under Title IX. You don't have to just rely on the government to enforce this act. And so because of her, there's so many lawyers like me who can go to court, who can help survivors and enforce those acts. And the reason I bring her up is you would think she went to med school, wouldn't you? She didn't get to go. Because once she won her case, they found a whole new reason. Well, fine, you can come even though you're a woman, but now you're too old. And the reason she was too old is because she went ahead and had kids and raised them first, like many women did. And so that prevented her. And the only reason I know about Jerry is she takes swim class with my mom in Florida. Like, they're retirees and they ran into each other. And she's like, you should meet Jerry. Jerry is a hero of mine. And it was so sad to learn that she never got to go to med school. But wow, did she change the world. And
so this is where I remind everybody, this is the original reason Title IX existed. was that there were quotas in some schools, most schools, in professions where, you know, basically, if you run an institution that you want to build a reputation for graduating med school graduates, you know, doctors, specialists, general practitioners, whatever, that go out and become great doctors in their communities and so on. You want people who are going to graduate from your university and then actually go into the profession, do the work, do the job, and make a name for themselves. And people will find out, hey, this great surgeon or this great general practitioner, this great specialist, this great oncologist, whatever, came from that school. I want to go to that school too. You want people that are going to go out there and earn enough of a living that they will support the school later by making donations. You want people that are going to go out there that you can, when you go to other organizations that you are going to ask for donations from, or when you want to get federal funding, you can say, these are the results that we produce. And there was a time when, for most women who went to university, the degree was a feather in their cap, not a doorway to a profession. Now, that wasn't true of all women who went to university. There were women who graduated from university and went on and became doctors and lawyers and other professions, engineers, everything, scientists. But the fact that there were enough that would get that degree and then not use it was a good enough reason for universities to turn around and say, well, we're going to make sure that most of the seats in this particular area that we want to be able to brag to people about what our graduates have done after they got out of school that are reserved for people who are going to actually go out and do with that degree what that degree is for. And that was men. Well, by the 70s, that was outdated. But the colleges hadn't kept up. Title IX was a government response, it was a federal response. It was probably not needed. Universities probably would have been catching up regardless. But that was what it was for. It was a legitimate response in that it was a response to something real. But all the stuff that's come since has not been a legitimate response. And this is what feminists do. They take one thing that is legitimate and they use it as a towing chain to bring in a whole bunch of shit that isn't.
Yeah, like, I mean, I wonder if that woman that initially did that would be proud of somebody like, say, Mattress Girl, who was found to have made the accusation even though she was sending a bunch of text messages talking about how much she loved that guy.
No.
Like, is that a valid comparison to make for this thing that might have originally once had a good use?
Well, would she even prior to that, 10 years ago, they were using this to eliminate men's gymnastics teams and men's wrestling teams and the men's side of the university's track team and so on. Was that part of her goal? Because I don't think it was. I think she wanted to be able to go to med school, and I think she wanted women to be able to go to med school, and I don't think she wanted anything else more than that. I don't think most people who pioneer something worthwhile want to see it exploited for nefarious purposes or stupid purposes. But it's just like I'm sure the first person who figured out how to use a sharp object as a cutting tool probably didn't necessarily want to see people get murdered with sharp objects. Probably the person that invented the gun invented it for hunting. But in any case, we're stuck with the fact that people do stupid things with good inventions, and this is one of those examples. I'm going to catch up a little bit on our super chats. We have... I think we just have one since the last one. That's Albert Nada. Gave us $5 Canadian, and said, in my next video, I will be tearing a strip off the Humble Ford show. Have any of you been on my channel? I don't know.
Chill.
Yeah, it's a good chill. Yeah, it's $5 ad space. But in any case, I don't think I have. So you'll have to contact Alison. And she's I always gotta look to make sure I actually get it right. You can contact her on Twitter. She's honeybadgerbite on Twitter, but I think it's spelled BYTE. And of course, it's not going to show on my screen. It's BITE, honeybadgerbite. Or I believe it's topic@badgerpod.com is our email. So, and yeah, Mr. Roboto gave us US $2 and said, isn't it time we amend Title IX to update it? Title IX is outdated enough that, in my opinion, it would not be wrong to repeal it or to create a new law, updating it with an expiration date. That at the end of the expiration date, it would cease to apply as a law. It's run its course. We don't need it anymore. There isn't anything that Title IX covers that isn't covered by other law. And we don't really need, like, all of the campus policy that's come out of Title IX, all of that is stuff that is unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's that. As far as Title IX is concerned, I don't see any reason why we need to continue having it. But on with our professional victim.
That's the legacy. So, no matter what loss you may have in fighting for Title IX and the rights of others, you may not win, but the rest of us may win because of your courage. So I really hope that as we think towards the future and all those threats, you will have the moral courage necessary for that fight. And this is my favorite quote that was at Serve Justice that came up a lot. Few men are willing to brave the disapproval of their fellows, the censure of their colleagues, the wrath of their society. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence, yet is the one essential vital quality for those who seek to change a world which yields most painfully to change. We need moral courage, and you can get that from looking at the past, you can see it in our present, and I hope you take it into the future. Thank you so much.
And everybody clapped. Jeez,
It's over! It's over!
There's somebody asks one question.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a
My
Q&A.
contact information's up there. I have business cards.
She's gonna talk.
Down
There's
here.
gonna be somebody's gonna ask about the
I know
Supreme
we're
Court
running
of the
close on
ERA.
time, but if there is a question or two from anyone, I'm very happy to answer. Otherwise, I'm going to hand the mic over to wrap it up. Yes.
So, let's say you get Virginia and pass it, right? Do you think this Supreme Court, this is the burden, this Supreme Court, and especially if Kennedy retires and is replaced by Gorsuch II, do you think this court will uphold, or will they fall back on the time expiration, regardless of the dubiousness of the merits?
So it's a great question. So even if we get that last state we need for the Equal Rights Amendment to be ratified by 3/4 of the states, does the Supreme Court take up challenges against it or let it pass? I think even with the conservative court we win, because all the conservative courts are textualists. They care about what the Constitution says, first and foremost, and the Constitution doesn't care about any arbitrary time limit. The backup plan, and just to give you a little context, in the 70s, when all this amazing progress was happening in the ERA, there was a conservative movement led by a conservative woman to try to undercut it, and it was successful. It was very successful. It got 5 states to rescind, and it put a time limit.
That'd be Phyllis Schlafly.
How quickly the ERA had to pass. A lot of people think the time limit doesn't mean anything because the Constitution doesn't care. But the backup plan is you get Congress to remove any time limit. So you have the ratification, you remove the time limit from the bill, maybe that helps you get through. We need Congress then, right? We need Congress to actually take that action. So if you're not registered to vote, something tells me you all are, make sure you vote, get your students to get registered to vote, because we do need a Congress that is willing to take that action. And even there's a question of the 5 states that rescinded during that time. One of them's probably unlawful. The other 4, maybe that means something. It's never been brought up as a legal question, which is, again, why I'm preparing for this to go to court someday and to need a litigator. So why not pass it in 5 states? Virginia.
So here we have, she's gonna, I think we're gonna stop with this because she's just gonna name the states and everything. Well, what she has basically said there is the consent of the states that have rescinded doesn't matter. And
so are we raping the states now?
Right. And she just told us the real reason, the real genuine underlying reason why feminists so vehemently oppose the appointment of Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. They do not want a strict constitutionalist on the Supreme Court because he is going to recognize that the Constitution already covers sex discrimination and that we do not need another amendment to enforce it. We simply need to recognize that the 14th Amendment already covers sex discrimination and already applies when sex discrimination happens. And we have the other rights laid out in the Constitution are all they all apply to the government. The government's not allowed to infringe on those rights. They don't necessarily. There's some application to public relationships, interpersonal interactions, but not on the level that the ERA would enforce. And it's basically, like I said, a power grab the way it's written. And I do not trust proponents of the ERA in their assertion that once it's passed, it will be equally enforced. Because I looked at the Violence Against Women Act, and we keep getting told how neutral that is. And yeah, there's language in it that says it's not to be discriminatory, but it has been discriminatorily enforced since 1994. There's the fact that, something is supposed to be non-discriminatory doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be usable as a support for men's rights. So, like I said, personally, I'm not going to get behind the Equal Rights Act as long as the wording of the act is as it is currently. Take out that bit about Congress being able to pass laws to enforce it. That would go a long way toward my looking at it as a potentially valid amendment. Change it so that all it says is that the 14th Amendment covers sex discrimination in addition to the other forms that are named in it, and I'd be all for it. But it doesn't do that. So until it does, I won't be. I think they're going to do what they've done with everything else. They're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until they get it done. It will probably happen, and then we will see a future where the Equal Rights Act or Equal Rights Amendment is part of the Constitution. And we may see a future beyond that where, like Prohibition, it gets repealed by another amendment. It just depends on the results of it being passed and how it gets used and what people think of it and what response politicians have to that. So, but we've heard from our professional victim, and we've heard from we've heard from all of us regarding Title IX and the details of this woman's speech. And I think we've heard we've heard all of our super chats. So unless anybody has anything to add.
Nope, I think that's about the end of it, finally. Woo.
Yeah, I think we've managed to keep this sausage to no more than an hour and a half. Well, an hour and 40 minutes long. That's not too bad. You know?
Well, not counting all of the other link sausages that we had to use to talk about this woman's talk for however many shows we had to talk about it for.
Oh yeah, we spent a month on this woman. Just about.
I think more than a month.
Yeah.
Well, we've spent on Title IX. We've spent a couple of months on Title IX.
Oh
but,
yeah.
On a Title IX conference, and Michael Keller says now we need chemo. Unfortunately, there is no chemo for this cancer, and no, and I think I'm gonna do next week. I'm probably gonna do a discussion on another discussion on Title IX as the topic, because Title IX, now that we've had this hearing with Kavanaugh, and the most ridiculous accusations in the world have come out. Like, some of the accusations, and they're getting called credible. That's the most hilarious thing.
Well, right. Okay. The first one was probably the most credible-ish, maybe.
Yeah, or at least the
least
least stupid.
The second and the third one, they just get fucking ridiculous. Like, gang rape trains across, 10 parties that this person went to? Like, what the fuck? And nobody has corroborated it. The New York Times refused to publish because they could not corroborate. That's saying something.
Yeah, because they've published a lot of uncorroborated stuff. But,
right, so if they're even saying it, then you know that you've got a shitty story.
And with all of that, and this... these handmade protesters and all of that coming. I think this discussion is.
I know so many people that literally think that we're going to be turning into the Handmaid's Tale if Brett Kavanaugh gets appointed. I'm like, you're crazy. You know that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You are actually unhinged and suffering from Trump derangement syndrome.
So I think we've got basically a whole discussion there that needs to happen. I personally, I don't think #MeToo, I don't think the Me Too movement was ever actually about victims of sexual assault. It was always about blaming and shaming men and empowering feminism, not women.
Yeah, everybody says that, okay, Me Too did some good things. I'm like,
name one. Yeah. I want them to name one, because if they start saying that, well, it got sexual assault to start being a topic of discussion, that was already happening.
It's been a topic of discussion forever.
Exactly. So this is definitely something that I want to do our next show on. So you can look forward to us dealing in a little more cancer next week. But it's got to be done, and if we don't do it, who's going to do it? But with that, I would like to thank my wonderful co-hosts for trudging through this professional victim's professional victimhood for a month, and for trudging through 2 months of Title IX insanity. I'd like to thank everybody that listened to us and supported our treatment of this awful cancer. And I would like to thank everybody that is involved in the making of HBR Talk and all of our other shows. There's a lot of work that goes into this, and a lot of stuff that's behind the scenes. So thanks, everybody, and good night.